Hello and welcome to this lecture on the hire purchase law. This is a great topic also to discuss under law. Through this topic, we are going to understand what is hire purchase. We are going also to be looking at the key terms that are discussed in the hire purchase law. We're also going to see the differences between hire purchase and credit sale. We're also going to see the rights and duties of different parties that are involved in the hire purchase law or hire purchase engagements. It is important to note that the reason why we are studying this law on hire purchase, first and very importantly, is to be able to protect the rights of both parties. When we are talking about both parties in the context of hire purchase, we are referring to the person we call the hirer, and we're also referring to the person we call the owner. We are going to be seeing that in the definition of terms. The reason also that we are going to be studying this particular law is that through the hire purchase law, it is going to, or it helps us facilitate access to various goods within the market. And it is also important because it regulates ownership and transfer of goods. It is also very, very important because once we understand the aspects around the hire purchase law, then we are going to prevent ourselves from unfair contractual terms and obligations that we might find ourselves into. And through the law also, we can be able to provide legal remedies to those parties that have been aggrieved. Maybe there was a breach of the hire purchase contract. So those legal remedies could be maybe cancellation of the contract. It could be repossession of the goods, for example, where the hirer does not pay the goods, and so on and so forth. And finally, and most importantly, second but not last, it is going to encourage responsible lending and buying. And basically, that is because it's going to be critical. This law is very, very critical in terms of setting the limits and the conditions that must be in writing in this particular law. So that is basically the overview of what we are getting into. So for us to be able to further understand, we now are able to ask ourselves a very critical question. And the question is, what is hire purchase law? And we are noting that it is a set of legal rules and regulations that govern hire purchase agreements, also a type of financial arrangement commonly used for buying of goods. And we are noting that it is a kind of an agreement, contractual in nature, where a person, this person is the person you're going to be referring to, the hirer, takes possession of goods immediately and agrees to pay for them in installments over time. We are going to see that relationship of when the goods are taken will keep varying. Sometimes it will also depend with the vendors or the sellers of the goods or the owners of the goods. There are those that ownership is going to wait until you pay the final installment. Then you can be able to take up the good. And there are those that, having paid the initial installment, you can enjoy your goods. Quite a number of terms that you're going to be seeing on the key terms. The first one is the owner, and we are noting that this is a person who lets or has to let goods to a hirer under a hire purchase agreement. So the owner of the goods is the one who has what we call in sale of goods, is the one who has title to the goods, and he is the one who has possession of the goods also before the contract begins. Then the person who wants these goods so that they can be able to pay in installments is our second definition here. Then the person we refer to as the hirer. And we are noting that this is a person who has taken goods from an owner under a hire purchase agreement. Then in hire purchase also, we discuss what we call the hire purchase price. And we are noting that it's the total amount payable by the hirer for the property in the goods to pass to him. And it is also going to include the deposit that you have initially paid. So hire purchase price simply is the total amount for the item. Remember, the conversations of hire purchase are going to be invoked in situations where we cannot be able to pay for the item fully at once. Yeah, so you are given a total amount, let's say 1,000 US dollars, and you're told for you to be able to at some point enjoy possession of this item, first make a deposit of 500 US dollars, and then the rest of the amount you can pay in what we call installments. So the hire purchase price is the total amount of the item. Then other key terms are what we call the hire purchase agreement. So this is now the agreement under which goods are let to on hire, and the hirer has option to purchase them according to the conditions of the contract. So when the owner and the hirer enter into an hire purchase contractual agreement, we are going to see one of the key things that must be present is this hire purchase agreement. It needs to be in writing. It needs to be in writing. So that is the agreement. And then we have other terms, what we call installments. I've mentioned about it. These ones now are what we call periodic payments that are made by the hirer of a fixed term. And then we have repossession. And this simply means the act of taking back the goods if the hirer is going to default on payment. As we wind up on the key terms, we also have what we call default or defaulting. Sometimes the hirer is not going to pay their goods on time or as agreed in the hire purchase agreement. So we refer to that as defaulting. And that's why we are noting here that it is the failure by the hirer to meet the terms of the agreement. For example, missing payments. They have not made payments. And then finally is what we refer to as a breach of a contract. When we talk about breaching a contract, we talk about it being the violation of the terms agreed in the hire purchase contract. And one of the examples of violating the terms is what we have just mentioned above, when you fail to pay any of the installments. Now, we have what we call the nature of the hire purchase agreement. It is important to note that it is regulated by the general principles of the law of contract. When we talk about the law of contract, that is where we say that there must be an offer and acceptance. And we discussed those two items in a subtopic under the law of contract that we refer to as elements of a contract, where we talk about there needs to be an offer, and we usually say that an offer is a promise to do something. And acceptance is when the person who has been promised agrees to the offer. Sometimes we also call that person the promise, the promiser, and the promisee. So definitely other elements of the contract that are also very important in hire purchase would be something like a legal consideration or a lawful consideration. So it is very, very important. And also we have other elements that are legal object. We have other elements still under the law of contract, what we call free consent, that even as you enter into an hire purchase agreement, free consent means it should not be something that is forced on you, what we call coercion. The agreement, the hire purchase agreement, should not be forced under what we call duress. It should not be due to fraud. It should not be due to misrepresentation. It should not be due to what we call undue influence. So that's why we are noting it is regulated by the general principles of the law of contract, because we are invoking the conversation of elements of a contract, that they are also extremely very critical in hire purchase agreement. We are also noting that the hirer agrees to pay the goods in installments. We have just defined installment as the periodic payments of the amount that is remaining once you make a deposit. And then also very, very important on our statement number 3 is ownership of goods remains with the seller until the hirer pays the final installment. You are going to find today some of the hire purchase agreements would maybe allow, based on, for example, the amount that you have put in, there are owners that will still allow you to go with the item and you continue to pay, especially around electronics. But what happens when you do not pay a particular day? For example, you have taken on hire purchase a solar panel or a solar connection. Once you do not pay, and maybe you're going to find these solars they also come with them televisions, and they also come with them with other electronic gadgets. So what happens at that point where the owner has allowed you to go with the item and you have not paid, from their end, they have the ability to switch off your TV. They have the ability to switch off your light. So with those punishments in place, you just have to conform to paying your installment. I have seen some that you pay daily. I have seen some that you pay monthly, and so on and so forth. But those owners that are not comfortable, they will still allow you to pick the item once you make your final installment. And we are noting finally that on the payment of the last installment, the ownership transfers automatically from the owner to the hirer. So that is the transfer of ownership. Once you complete paying, even this one that I'm explaining here, once you complete paying your solar connection, nobody is now going to switch it again off. Yeah, so it is what we are emphasizing on our final point. Now, very, very important on what we call the requirements of a hire purchase agreement. We are noting that for a hire purchase agreement to be valid, then it needs to be, the first one I had mentioned, it needs to be a written agreement. And we are also noting very importantly here that verbal hire purchase agreements are not legally binding. So we have to be extremely keen when we are entering into verbal hire purchase agreements, because there will be no evidence that there was any sort of an agreement. That's why we are emphasizing on the need to have the agreement written. And the second one, we also very importantly need to identify or do identification of the parties. So when we are doing identification of the parties, we are looking at the full names and addresses, the owner, the seller, or the financing company, or the hirer, the person making the payments and using the goods. So those two parties are very, very critical. Remember, we have said this particular law borrows most of its issues and content around the law of contract. And we usually say the law of contract is also a binding agreement between two people, the offerer and the offeree. So in this context here, as we identify the parties, then who is the owner, who is the hirer, we need to know them. Another requirement, number 3, we need to have also copies of the agreement. So the hirer must be given at least one copy of the agreement which he has signed. Yeah, so that is a documentation that is prepared. We have just mentioned about the agreement. So there are more than one copy. And whoever is paying in installments needs to have their copy. It will be their guiding principle. The reason we also emphasize on the written part of this conversation is that in case of breach of the hire purchase agreement, then you will have a basis to present and show that this was an agreement and it was not reached upon, or the parties did not do as agreed. Then the fourth one, we have the repossession of terms, conditions under which the owner can repossess the goods if the hirer defaults. So if the person paying in the installments defaults, there must be a clause that indicates what really happens in that particular instance. Can the goods be seized? And then we have the signature of parties. The agreement must be signed by both parties to be legally binding. Those are very, very critical requirements that you need to take note of and understand. As we look at the contents of our hire purchase agreement, so we have what we call, very importantly, number one, the statement of cash price. When we talk about the statement of cash price, what is the total amount that you are supposed to pay for the item? That total amount must be included. And then we have installment terms. How much are you going to be paying in the subsequent remaining amount? And then we have dates when the installments are to be payable, so that can also be included. A description of the goods sufficient to identify them. Yeah, so you describe the goods, and you are going to be seeing implied conditions in a hire purchase agreement. That when you do this description of goods, whatever items that you have described, they must match with what the hirer is going to have once they make their payments. They need to match the description that they were given. The contents of a hire purchase agreement, last but not least, we need to have the rights to terminate the agreement. And finally, default and penalties. This particular clause is going to explain what is going to happen when you default. Some instances, for example, when you default, you lose even the amount that you had paid. So it is not very advisable to default. Or a penalty of a particular percentage or a penalty of particular amount is charged on you for defaulting. So those are critical aspects within the contents of a hire purchase agreement. As you enter into such kind of agreements, you need to remember these particular contents of the hire purchase agreement. Then we have the differences between the hire purchase and credit sale. When we talk about the hire purchase, it is important to note that it involves an owner and a hirer. Yeah, so it involves an owner and a hirer. We have mentioned that in our previous discussions. And credit sale, of course, when we talk about credit, is where now you give somebody items on loan, and then they are going to pay at a later date. So this is governed by the Sale of Goods Act. So that's why we are saying it involves the seller and the buyer. So the buyer takes goods on credit, for example, in a shop, and then once they get money, they can be able to go back to the shop and make payments. On the hire purchase side, the second one is ownership remains with the owner till payment of the last installment is made. So ownership is going to remain with the owner of the item. That simply means even if you have the owner has been kind enough to give you the goods and you default, they can repossess them because you have not completely made your payment. And the second one, ownership passes to the buyer on payment of the first installment. Ownership passes to the buyer on payment of the first installment. So once you pay the first installment, you can be given the title as you continue to pay. And then the other one is hirer may return the goods before due date after complying with certain requirements. So the hire purchase is also very common when in the car industry nowadays, people are allowed to hire these cars. And if by any chance you've come across these agreements, these guys are going to give you a timeline. Maybe it's for 2 days, and then in the second day, it should be at the yard maybe by 6 p.m. There will be nothing wrong if you return it earlier than whatever is indicated. And on the credit sale, we are saying buyer cannot return goods to the seller unless there is a breach of a condition. So in credit sale, you are not allowed to return, but in hire purchase, you can be able to return the goods. And also in terms of the laws that governs these two kinds of conversations in the hire purchase, it is governed by what we call the Hire Purchase Act. And then on the side of credit sale, it is governed by the sale of goods. And finally, in terms of hire purchase, we are saying the goods passes at the end of the final installments. So this particular statement is not going to work, for example, in what I've said, the hiring of cars, because ideally you're intending to hire and then be able to return. But you can be doing hiring maybe, or you can be intending to possess a television in your house. So you agree this television is this amount. It could be $50, it could be $500, depending on the size. Then make a deposit, continue to pay the installments. Once you are through, collect your item. We have said for those owners that want to give you the item, you go with it and continue to pay when it's in your house. They have control of the item. And very interestingly, these guys will go ahead and even switch it. You are watching and you have not paid the installment, it goes off. That's very interesting. Yeah, and on the credit sale, the ownership is going to pass immediately. Conditions under the hire purchase agreement. These are conditions that we also study when we talk about the sale of goods law. And the first one, I had mentioned it, there's a place we interacted with it, that goods must match the description. So where the owner has made a description of these goods, that the television is like this in terms of size, it is a smart TV, and so on and so forth. Then once you have the TV, it should be able to match what the description was saying. Then the second one is the owner has the legal right to enter into the agreement. The other one is the goods must be of acceptable quality. This is also what we call in sale of goods, the goods must be of merchantable quality. Yeah? And then, very importantly, the fourth one, they need to be fit for purpose. And finally, ownership is going to pass to the hirer once all the terms, especially fulfillment of payment, are fulfilled, or the payment is fully done. And then we have what we call warranties under the hire purchase agreement. We are noting that when we talk about a warranty, yeah, it is a secondary or a less essential term in the contract. In case of a breach of this kind of a warranty, it may not allow the owner to, or it may not allow the hirer to terminate the agreement. But there will be opportunities for you to claim damages and compensation. For example, what we call right to quiet possession. Quiet possession means as you continue to enjoy this item, if you are given in advance, nobody should disturb you as you continually use the car. You can imagine you have hired a car to do some few errands for 2 days. And then as you are walking within town, somebody just appears somewhere and says, "What are you doing with my car?" Yeah, so that is what we call right to quiet possession. When you are given the car for 1 day, for 2 days, you should enjoy the services of that car without interruption. And then also, goods should be free from encumbrances. When we talk about encumbrances, they should not be having any links with third-party claims or charges. When we are talking about charges here, we are referring to hidden charges. You can imagine somebody has told you to pay $200 for the car for 3 days. And then as you return the car, they ask you to now pay 250 US dollars. That can only happen when you have messed up with the car. Most of those contractual agreements allow you, or they give you a clause that in case of any default that was not there as you are picking the car, then you are going to meet the obligations of paying for those damages. So that is extremely very, very important under the warranties in the hire purchase agreement. And very importantly, we also look at the duties or obligations of the parties. We have the people that we call owners. So the owner, we have said it is the person who has possession of the goods. So what are some of the duties? The first one, they need to deliver the goods to the hirer. Secondly, they need to ensure that the goods match description. We have talked about that under the implied conditions. Uh, they also need to provide goods of mercantile and satisfactory quality. We have also mentioned that. So those are critical duties and obligations. And if you do not do them, there are definitely consequences, including cancellation of the hire purchase agreement. And also, somebody can seek that you pay damages or compensate them because the goods were not of good quality. The other one is that they need to ensure that the hirer enjoys quiet possession of goods. It is also importantly to have a disclosure of the cash price and full hire purchase terms. We have also mentioned that. And finally, once payments have been made, it is also your duty as the owner or obligation to be able to transfer ownership once the payments have been made. Then we have the duties of the hirer. It is important that the hirer, this is the person now who has requested to have the goods and pay them on installments. So the duty number one is to ensure that these payments are being made without fail. And then also take reasonable care of the goods. That is extremely very, very important also. For situation like I've given where you are just hiring a car for a day or two, then reasonable care means you have to make sure that the car um, does not, you make sure that the car is continually okay and as good as you picked it from the car yard. So reasonable care. The other one is use the goods for lawful purposes only. So you cannot, for example, hire the car, then you use it to transport illegal products like bang, like cocaine. Those are issues that could put you in a lot of trouble because they are against the laws of the land. And then do not sell, pledge, or transfer the goods. As a hirer, that car that you have hired for 2 days, you cannot sell it. You cannot now use it to make a pledge. Maybe you're not going to pick another loan as you are now in terms of financial terms, and you want to place it on credit. Definitely, if they ask you for the documentation about the logbooks, you don't have them because you have hired. And finally, it is the duty of the hirer to notify the owner of any damage or loss. Yeah, so if you borrowed a car, sometimes you could be moving around and somebody hits you at the back. It is good the owner knows that there was a damage. Then you can have a conversation. We have said most of the time when those damages happen, then it is going to be the duty of the hirer to pay for the repairs to be done. Rights of the hirer. Number one is right to be notified the cash price of the goods. It is important. Anytime you are picking any goods on installments or on hire purchase, you cannot begin to pay things that have not been defined. So let us have the cash price defined. It is important from the word go that you know about the cash price and get to know if a deposit is required, get to know how much, also get to know in terms of installments how much you're supposed to pay. And also very, very importantly, we have also seen that it's important to know the dates at which the installments are due. And then also right to sue in damages for breach of a hire purchase agreement. Remember, for example, we have said the goods must match the description. So if they have not matched the description and probably they have put you at a loss, maybe it is something that you also wanted to, once you complete paying, you also sell it at a later date. It is important that if that is not met, then you have a right as a hirer to sue for damages. We have also talked about the right of quiet possession of goods let under the hire purchase agreement. So there should be no any forms of disturbance as you are enjoying the usage of those goods. And then also a right of indemnity for any loss or liability caused by the reason of any defects in the goods or title. When you talk about indemnity, when you talk about indemnifying, a very common term also in the law of insurance is to mean that you have a right to be reimbursed, you have a right to be compensated in case a loss was caused by defects, especially those defects that the owner did not disclose. And then also finally is a right to terminate the hire purchase agreement. Also, it's very, very important to understand the rules on termination of a hire purchase agreement. Number one, the hirer can purchase or can terminate the agreement at any time. Basically, you're going to find, even though we are saying at any time, there must be a breach that has been done, a breach of the agreement. The second one is termination must be done by a written notice. So you put it in writing. That is very, very important. Remember, as you are beginning or as you are entering into the agreement, you put down the hire purchase agreement. So you cannot terminate again by word of mouth. So you put it in writing. Then the third one, the hirer must return the goods to the owner. I've given an example of hiring a car for 1 or 2 days. So once you've returned that car after 2 days, definitely the hire purchase agreement has come to an end, unless at the time that you're going to come again and request to hire the car again. But automatically, once you return, that is the end of that hire purchase agreement. And then the owner can terminate if the hirer defaults. So we have emphasized very much on the importance of paying the installments. So if you do not pay them, then you are going to be in trouble and the owner can terminate the contract. Number 5, which is very interesting, is that no refund of installments already paid after termination. That's one of the dangers now of not paying your installments. And I had mentioned it as we were beginning. If you fail to pay along the way, then you can now not claim installments that you paid. Yeah, those will be treated as most likely that is a loss that you are going to suffer. So you have to be extremely keen on that rule number 5. It should be your guiding principle so that you begin your installments and end paying them, so that the title of the goods can now pass to you. And finally, the hirer will also be required to pay compensation by way of damages if it did not take reasonable care of the goods. I take you back to my example of hiring a car for 2 days. If you have not taken reasonable care of the car, definitely you will be required to make compensation and pay for damages. Now, rules on completion of the hire purchase agreement. When do we say now we have closed, we have completed? Number 1, the hirer must have paid all the agreed installments. That is very important. We have really emphasized that in this conversation since we began. And the second one, all terms and conditions of the agreement must be fulfilled. So remember, we emphasized also on the need to have a written agreement. So make sure the terms of the agreement are fulfilled. And then we have ownership of the goods transfers to the hirer after the final payment. We have also talked about that. The hirer has no further financial obligation after completion. Once you complete whatever was in the agreement, we are saying you have nothing more to pay. And the fifth one is the goods become the full property of the hirer. So once you make your final installment, even in those instances where I was saying the TV would be switched off, definitely nobody is no longer interested with your TV. You can watch it as many times as you are interested. That's very interesting. Recovery of possession. There's a place we mentioned where the owner can be able to recover possession of the goods. So it is what we are now coming to emphasize here, to say that the owner can recover goods if the hirer defaults. And that simply means if the hirer fails to pay the installments. Another time we are talking about installments. Of course, we saw it in the key terms. So it is something that we repeatedly mention here in the conversation of the hire purchase law. Another way of recovery of possession is forcible forcible entry or seizure is not allowed. Yeah, so even at the point where we are doing repossession, then you cannot use force. Remember what I just said about coercion, duress. That applies across. Even if an hirer has not paid your goods, you cannot use force. That's very important. The second point is extremely very important, so that it safeguards you. Remember, I've said the hire purchase agreement, as we were beginning, it safeguards the rights of both parties, the hirer and the owner. So even if the owner has defaulted in payment, then you cannot harass them, you cannot beat them, you cannot harm them, so that you recover possession. And the other one is the hirer must be given notice before repossession. So communicate to them that because, for example, you have defaulted in paying your installments, I, the hirer, Mr. So-and-so, Madam So-and-so, intend to recover the items. Notify them. And the other one is goods must be returned in reasonable condition if repossessed. So you can imagine, once you are told the repossession is going to happen, now you decide to mess up with the goods. Definitely you will be held liable in that particular situation. And then also we are noting that after repossession, the owner may sell the goods to recover the losses. So the owner still has a right on the goods. So if they repossess them because you have not paid installments, then they have a right to sell those goods to a different person. And finally, an emphasis on what you are saying on our point number 2, where there is improper repossession, it can lead to legal action against the owner. So we have come to the end of the hire purchase law. I believe it has been an enlightening session. Kindly interact with me on the chat platform. On this platform, you can also feel free to subscribe to the channel as we continue to dispense knowledge and discuss various concepts. And that's why we are calling the channel Class Made Easy. It is just meant to interpret different legal terms and terms around all other conversations around business to make them easy for you to be able to understand. Thank you so much.